Hey readers, welcome to my library and to this edition of The Book Traveler. In today's episode, we're going to learn about a writer that you've probably read in school, maybe even dreaded in school, William Shakespeare. Unfortunately, most people's introduction to William Shakespeare is in ninth grade with Romeo and Juliet, which personally I think is one of his worst plays. However, after writing over 37 plays and over 150 sonnets, his writing still endures. William Shakespeare was born around April 23, 1564, in Stratford-upon-Avon. This is the house that Shakespeare grew up in. You can go and visit it today. William Shakespeare was the first of 8 children. William Shakespeare's father was a glove maker as well as Justice of the Peace in Stratford-upon-Avon. Because wealthy people were the people who purchased and wore gloves, his father made a good living, and as a result, the family had a nice home to live in. The glove shop is in a ground room floor in the family's home. This upstairs bedroom is known as the birthing room. This is where William Shakespeare was born, along with his 7 siblings. Mattresses in Shakespeare's time were made of 3 sacks of straw or hay over a rope mattress. They would use the stay, that's the wooden tool you can see on the mattress, each night to turn the ropes and tighten them. This led to the saying, sleep tight. We also get the saying, hit the hay or hit the sack from this because they'd use the stay also to beat the mattress to get lumps out of it. This is the window in the birthing room of Shakespeare's house, and as you can see, names have been scratched into it over time. Shortly after Shakespeare died, he became famous and people made the pilgrimage to his childhood home. As part of that pilgrimage, they would scratch their name into the glass. The earliest recorded date is from 1806, and of course, this is no longer permitted. Meals would have been cooked on a hearth, like the one you see here. Shakespeare's relatives owned the house after his father passed away, and eventually, additional rooms were added to the back, and it was turned into the Swan and Maidenhead Inn. This is a picture from the outside of what the inn would have looked like around 1830. Behind Shakespeare's home today, there's a garden with a cafe and, of course, a gift shop. In the museum next to his home, you can see some of his plays from the first folios. Shortly after Shakespeare died in 1616, his friends recognized the value of his writing. They collected his plays and published them in what has become known as the First Folios. William Shakespeare attended the King's School, named for King Edward VI, for about 8 years. If you visit today, there may be an interpreter who teaches you some Latin. We know that Shakespeare studied Latin, and we know some of the books that he read based on his plays that include quotes from these pieces. In the picture on the left, you can see the schoolmaster holding a collection of birch branches. At the end of each week, students were either rewarded or punished for their behavior. If their behavior had been good during the week and they had studied well, they received an apple. If their behavior was poor, they were swatted with the birch branches. In the picture on the right, you can see the benches that the students would have sat on. This was a one-room school. These benches were called forms, and that's where we get the term 6th form, 7th form, based on the ages of the boys. Inside of these benches held all of the books and materials that the boys would need. Boys would attend the school typically from about age 7 to age 14. This is a second classroom that was added later. Here you can see the desks and the ink quills that the students would have written with. If you think about Shakespeare's plays, he wrote all of those with a quill pen and ink. The King's School still exists today, although it's no longer a one-room school. In 2014, they admitted girls to the school for the first time. Outside the village of Stratford-upon-Avon, you can visit Anne Hathaway's cottage, shown here. Anne's family were farmers, and she probably met William Shakespeare on a market day, Thursday or a Saturday, when farmers came into town to sell their produce. They met when Shakespeare was 18 years old and Anne was 26. They had a whirlwind romance that got married quickly, and 6 months later, they had their first child. The Hathaway cottage was originally only 3 rooms. Her brother bought it and added on, expanding the house to 10 rooms. These photos show the kitchen and the dining room where the family would have eaten. The room on the left is the laundry room, and to the right is one of the bedrooms upstairs. This is the nicest room in the house, and this is where Anne Hathaway and Shakespeare spent the beginning of their married life together. In the early 1800s, Mary Baker, who was one of Anne Hathaway's descendants, started publicizing the home as the home of Shakespeare's wife and began giving tours as a way to raise money. Descendants of Anne Hathaway lived in this home for over 400 years, 13 generations, until it was finally sold in 1911. Although Shakespeare performed plays in many locations, he's best known for the Globe Theatre. Shakespeare had a 16% interest in the theatre, and so he made quite a bit of money off of it. In fact, when he returned to Stratford-upon-Avon after he retired, he was able to buy a house now called New Place, which was the largest house in town. The Globe Theatre was originally built on the opposite side of the river from where it is now, near where the Shard stands today. The landowner decided he wanted some of that money that Shakespeare and his The Globe Theatre originally stood on the opposite side of the Thames River, near where the Shard stands today. The landowner decided that he wanted more of the money that Shakespeare and his fellow actors were making, so he decided to double the rent. The night before this was to happen, Shakespeare and the other actors tore down the theatre, moved it on barges across the river, and rebuilt it on the opposite side of the Thames, where the rent was cheaper. The Globe Theatre of today is actually the third Globe Theatre. It was built in the 1990s. And as you can see, it is right in the middle of London. As I turned around from where I was standing, here's the view that I saw. The day that I was visiting the Globe was Tech Week for a play that they were getting ready to perform, and so we were not allowed to take pictures inside. However, if you go to the Globe's website, you can see an excellent tour of the Globe Theatre. And I've borrowed some pictures from that website. This gives you an idea of the size of the Globe. It's actually not a very large theater. During Shakespeare's day, you could rent a seat for 6 shillings. This was about 1 day's wage. Or you could have a standing position on the floor for 1 shilling. The theater was in the lower income area of town and was always busy in the evenings. The people who were standing on the ground continued to eat and drink throughout the performance, and because there were no restrooms in the theater, when they needed to use it, they used it right there where they were. During Shakespeare's time, the Globe Theatre became known as the largest latrine in the world. Shakespeare was a good storyteller, and that is why his plays have remained so popular to this day. As you can see in this picture, the stage is thrust into the audience. There were no microphones, of course, and so the actors had to talk loudly to be heard. The actors also frequently broke the fourth wall by talking directly to the audience. During Shakespeare's time, the theater held about 6,000 people. Today, it's packed out at 1,600. At the Globe performances today, just as in Shakespeare's day, there is little to no scenery. In Shakespeare's time, there were very few costumes, and the costumes that performers did wear were typically used to show social class. The second Globe Theatre burned when a cannon was set off during a performance. The Globe Theatre of today is an exact replica, including the thatch roof, except that today there are sprinklers installed. The doors that you can see here are opened and closed throughout the performances as actors come onto and leave the stage. Here are some events from Shakespeare's life. In 1558, Elizabeth I took the throne in England. She was on the throne through 1603. This was a benefit to Shakespeare because she was a promoter of the arts. In 1564, William Shakespeare was born. The Black Death plague ended. Shakespeare attended King Edward VI School for 8 years, and in 1582, he married Anne Hathaway. 1592 is the first time that we see Shakespeare mentioned as a playwright. In 1597, he purchased New Place in Stratford, and in 1599, they moved the Globe Theatre across the river. In 1603, the Lord Chamberlain's men, the troupe that Shakespeare was a part of, became the King's Men after Elizabeth's death. In 1608, his granddaughter Elizabeth was born. She's the last descendant of William Shakespeare. In 1613, the Globe Theatre burned down, and in 1616, Shakespeare died. In 1623, the first folio, a collection of many of his plays, was published. Here are some of the sources that I used for information for this video. Special thanks to the Lilly Teacher Creativity Fellowship, who helped fund a portion of this trip. The locations that I visited as part of this trip include Anne Hathaway's cottage in the village of Shottery, the King Edward VI School in Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the Globe Theatre in London. The photos in this video are either my own or are from the websites listed previously. Thank you for watching today. Keep reading, and bon voyage.